Hi guys, welcome back to the next instalment of the BFG. First chapter is the Blood Bottler, one of the scary giants. Let's see what the Blood Bottler is like. The Blood Bottler. Suddenly a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Looks out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Blood Bottler!" But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked, except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Ugh. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten Snoscumper was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I is jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piffle fizz," shouted the Blood Bottler. "Bogswallop," he boomed. "You is talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. Yes, yes, boomed the Blood Bottler. "I is guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. "There's no one in here," he stammered. Why don't you leave me alone?" The Bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little Swiss figure, squimpy little bottlewort, prunty little pogswizzer. I is now going to search the promises." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back. But now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous Snoscumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Blood Bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy-looking. His eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and fat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. Oh my gosh, look how gruesome the Blood Bottler is, and look how much bigger he is than the BFG. Oh my goodness. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Blood Bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is as dotty as a dog's walker," cried the Blood Bottler. Soon the Blood Bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The Snoscumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the Blood Bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the Snoscumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The Blood Bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the Blood Bottler grabbed the half-eaten Snoscumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. "Sophie, where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot be possibly jumping off that high table, so where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So this is the filthy, rotsome glubbage you is eating," boomed the Blood Bottler, holding up the partly eaten snozzcumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash. For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. This is the scrumdiddlyumptious snozzcumber, he said. I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. You see, never trying it. Is you never trying a snozzcumber, blood bottler? Human beings are juicier, the blood bottler said. You was talking rummy tot, the BFG said, growing barer by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavour would send him bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on. But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, don't be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchit for my supper. The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed off end, began to tremble all over. You is not switch-fitting me as you, said the blood bottler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite and I'm positive you'll be shouting out how scrumdiddlyumptious this wonder veg is. The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It's not wholesome always to be eating meaty things. Just this once, the blood bottler said. I is going to taste these rots of meats of yours, but I was warning you, if it is filsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head. He picked up the snozzcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, Don't! But that would have been even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seed, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would not be killed quickly. Roared the blood bottler. And then he spat. All of the great lumps of snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she most certainly would have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the blood bottler. You little pig swiller. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozzcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetables splashed all over the cave. You's not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it? Yelled the blood bottler. This is the most disgusting taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be buggies to be swapping sluts like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beings. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, said the BFG. It is guzzly and glumptious, shouted the blood bottler. And tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble me a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the blood bottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It's important. I has plenty of cold eats in this scalding hot weather, and the next colding thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, said the BFG. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying there's wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school chidders, the blood bottler said. I was very fond indeed of English school chiddlers. There's a very nice inky booky flavour. Perhaps I would change my mind and go to England with them. You's disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant peoples, said the blood bottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinkly little squiddler. You is a pibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I was so happy to be finding you all in one lump. I was in his mouth. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. And there I was telling him to eat the filsome snozzcumber. And you was all the time inside it. The BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, poor little chiddler, cried the BFG. You was all covered in snozzcumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best he could. I was hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Said Sophie. I should like to find a way of disappearing every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let's see if I can think of a way of doing it. And here's the BFG cleaning up poor Sophie, covered in giant spit and snozzcumber. Oh my goodness. Okay, so the next chapter, last chapter for today, Frobscottle and Whizpoppers. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not only extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. Had she been at home, she would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgusting smelly snozzcumbers, she asked. Not even a fizzwinkle, answered the BFG. In that case, may I please have a little water? Water? Said the BFG, frowning mightily. What is water? We drink it. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants are drinking Frobscottle. Is it as nasty as snozzcumbers? Sophie asked. Nasty? Cried the BFG. Never is nasty. Frobscottle is sweet and jumbly. He got up from his chair and went to a second huge cupboard. He opened it and took out a glass bottle that must have been 6 feet tall. The liquid inside was pale green and the bottle was half full. Here is Frobscottle, he cried, holding the bottle up high, as though it contained some rare wine. The lumptuous fizzy Frobscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried, and indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of travelling upwards and bursting on the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning? The wrong way? Asked the BFG. In our fizzy drinks, the bubbles always go up and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, cried the BFG. You must never having the bubbles going upwards. That was the most flush-binking rubbish I was ever hearing. Why did you say that? He was asking me why, cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You was actually meaning to tell me you cannot see why it is a Scotty mistake to have the bubbles flying up instead of down? You said it was flush-bunking. Now you say it's Scotty. Which is it? Sophie asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is flush-bunking and a Scotty mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be as quacky as a duckhound. Boy, Ringo, your head must be so full of frog squinkers and buzzwangles. I was frittered if I know how you can think it at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? I will explain, but first, tell me what your name is. What name is you calling your Frobscottle by? Oh, one is Coke, Sophie said. Another is Pepsi. There's lots of them. And the bubbles are always going up? They all go up, Sophie said. Catastrous, cried the BFG. Up-going bubbles is a catastrous disastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you will listen carefully, I'll try to explain, but your brain is so full of bug whiffles, I doubt you will ever understand. I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well, then. When you're drinking this cookie drink of yours, is it going straight down into your tummy, is that right? Or is it left? It's right, Sophie said. And the bubbles going into your tummy, right or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubbles fizzing upwards? Of course. Which means they will come all swishing up your throat and out of your mouth and make a foulsome belchy burp. This is often true, Sophie said, but what's wrong with a little burp now and then? It's kind of fun. Burping is filsome, the BFG. Us giants is never doing that. But with your drink, Sophie said, what was it you called it? Frobscottle, said the BFG. With Frobscottle, Sophie said, the bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards, and that could have a far nastier result. What? Why nasty? Asked the BFG, frowning. Because, Sophie said, blushing a little, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. A whiz-popper, cried the BFG, beaming up at her. Us giants is making whiz-poppers all the time. Whiz-popping is the sign of happiness. It is music to our ears. You surely is not telling me that a little whiz-popping is forbidden among human beings? It's considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But you is whiz-popping, is you not, now and again? Asked the BFG. Everyone is whiz-popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie said. Kings and queens are whiz-popping, presidents are whiz-popping, glamorous film stars are whiz-popping, little babies are whiz-popping, but where I come from, it's not polite to talk about it. Ridiculous, said BFG. If everyone is making whiz-poppers, then why not talk about it? He is now having a swiggle of this delicious Frobscottle and you'll see the happy result. BFG shook the bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgling swig. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. For a few moments, the big friendly giant stood quite still, and a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long, wrinkly face. Then suddenly the heavens opened and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled on their shelves. But most astonishing of all, the force of the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant clear off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried when he came down to the earth again. Now that is whiz-popping for you. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the enormous bottle towards her. Don't you have a cup? Sophie said. No cups, only bottle. Sophie opened her mouth and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous Frobscottle down her throat. And oh my gosh, how delicious it was. It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavour. And the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing and jigging inside her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. Wow, guys, can you see the BFG doing a whiz pop off the floor here? Goodness me. It's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping her ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles travelling lower and lower down her tummy. Then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. Bravo! Shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. He was very good for a beginner. Let's have some more. Wow. What a funny ending to this part. Started with the scary blood bottler and ended up with the whiz pops. I'd love to try some Frobscottle. Maybe we can try and make some when we come back to school and see what happens. Okay, guys, that's enough for today. Speak to you tomorrow.